In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. 20 years ago, the United States was attacked. Not by Iraq, not by the people of Afghanistan, not by the government of Afghanistan. But we went to war with the people and government of Afghanistan for sheltering the attackers. And last week, after nearly 20 years of occupation, that war, or at least our ground involvement in it, ended. During those 20 years of war, the U.S. spent nearly $2 trillion on the war in Afghanistan and rebuilding Afghanistan. The U.S. and NATO forces lost more than 3,500 soldiers, and well over 100,000 Afghanis died as well, tens of thousands of them being civilians. What now? Well, in the last 2 weeks of August, our government evacuated over 100,000 Afghanis out of that country to safety. These people worked with our military as translators, worked with the Allied government, and were advocates for basic human rights. Now, it is on the people of the United States to welcome, embrace, and support these people who had to flee their homeland because of what we have done over the last 20 years. And this truth is reinforced by all of our readings today, which share uncomfortable truths, uncomfortable lessons for us all. First, we heard from the book of Proverbs that a good name is worth more than riches. God made both the rich and the poor. God made all people. We heard that those who sow injustice or rule with anger will not earn God's favor. We must be generous and share with the poor. And God is on the side of the poor and the oppressed. This passage carries on a theme that we heard last week, that our faith must be about more than simply words. We must act on it. Specifically, we are called to care for the poor, the marginalized, and the suffering. This alone compels us to care for refugees from war-torn regions, like Afghanistan. This reading is also telling us that growing economic inequality is not a new problem. Even during the reign of King Solomon, nearly 3,000 years ago, when these verses from Proverbs were written, it was apparent that the wealthy used their status and power to control the weak. But here we are being reminded that God made all people, both the oppressed and the oppressor. We also learn that God cares especially for those who are oppressed, for those who suffer. Thus, we too must be on the side of the oppressed, which means recognizing the dignity of every human being. And our epistle reading today again comes from what Luther called the Epistle of Straw, the letter of James. The message from Proverbs is reinforced here as well. Favoritism and partiality are bad. The rich and the poor must be treated equally. We must not make distinctions among ourselves. We must not oppress others or dishonor others because of their status. We must keep all of God's laws and show mercy. We must clothe and feed those in need. And finally, we heard the verse that enraged Luther. Faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. This chapter of James builds upon what we heard last week. It's the definition of pure religion, the care for widows and orphans. In particular, the focus is on treating people equally, because showing partiality goes against godly living. The author of this letter had seen favoritism lived out in faith communities, preferential treatment given to the rich and powerful, while the poor were neglected, or worse. So here we learn that showing partiality is violating the commandments and the royal law of Christ. This passage also contained that verse that Luther railed against, that faith without works is dead. Luther believed that we are saved by faith alone. He decried the Roman Church's inclusion of works. And on the surface, it would seem that this verse would line up with the Roman approach. However, if I may be so bold, we are saved not by works or by faith, but by the grace of God. And true faith produces fruit or works. So they are connected. But in the end, it is God who saves us, not anything that we do. There is, again, another clear message here, that we must care for the poor. We must actively do all that we can for those in need. And the modern parallel of this is that thoughts and prayers aren't enough for people who are suffering. We must act. We are to work to end unjust systems and oppression. We are to be on the side of the poor and the oppressed, because that is where God is. Finally, we heard from the Gospel of Mark as Jesus traveled in Gentile lands. First, Jesus was in Tyre, where a Syrophoenician woman came and begged Jesus to heal her daughter. And Jesus responded in a very unexpected way. He basically called her a dog. But she persisted. She said that even a dog can eat crumbs from underneath the table. Jesus then said that her daughter had been healed. He then went to the region of Decapolis, where people brought forth a deaf and mute man to be healed. Jesus took him aside and healed him. Jesus told him to tell no one, but he proclaimed it, as did others. This passage is a reminder about the universality of God, and a testament to the determined faith of one woman. We are being reminded that faith knows no human limitations or boundaries. So often in the Gospels, we see Jesus rejected by those closest to him, those like him. And yet many who come to him in faith are those on the margins, are rejected by society. And in this passage, we can see that Jesus' mission is about more than just the people of Israel. His mission is part of the universal plan of salvation. At the same time, though, we cannot overlook the strong language that Jesus used here. He basically called the Syrophoenician woman a dog. There are many interpretations of this. Some suggest this was a case where Jesus' human side came out, and that he was simply echoing the bigotry of his own culture. Others suggest Jesus was testing the woman to see if she would give up on her faith, to see if she would give up, or if her faith would compel her to persist. But I recently learned of another possible explanation that seemed rather relevant. In Tyre, at the time of Jesus, Gentile landowners exploited the Jewish population in the region. The Roman Empire used Tyre Gentiles as political pawns to exploit the Jewish people to the south. So, it is possible that Jesus was challenging the Syrophoenician woman's economic status and clout. This would perfectly connect this passage with our other readings today. But regardless of the details of what Jesus meant with his word choice, the overall themes are clear. Jesus' mission is one of infinite compassion and mercy. So must ours. There are no external barriers between God and any human beings. The distinctions that we have created and fixate upon are meaningless to God. We are to do likewise. We must support and advocate those in need of help. We can't do it all on our own. We are to work together. As I said earlier, these passages and recent events in the world have a lot to teach us. The images of people trying to flee oppression in Afghanistan should haunt us, much like the images of September 11th haunted us. And our readings today tell us that we must do better. We are to fight against injustice and lead with compassion, not anger or fear. We are to be generous and share what we have with the poor. We are to strive to treat people equally, regardless of status. We are to follow the royal law, to love one another as we love ourselves. We are to speak up boldly for those in need. We are to remember that God made and loves all people. We must do the same. So, what can we do? Advocate for justice and peace. Remain humble. Be merciful. Support organizations like the Episcopal Migration Ministries and Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. Perhaps consider opening up your home to a family of refugees, like a retiree I know. More simply, we are to keep the baptismal covenant. And so, in the midst of tragedy, let us persevere in resisting evil. Let us proclaim by word and example the good news. Let us seek and serve Christ in all people. Let us strive for justice and peace among all people. And let us respect the dignity of every human being. And we can, with God's help. Amen.